The scripture reading for today is going to come from the book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 4. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope.
Good morning. I got to write this down. If you were in my class, good evening. And here we are back in the morning, back to the future. It's great to see everybody out this morning. Hopefully this doesn't become like just a mundane statement that it's true. Every Sunday morning, every morning of your life, you wake up and you make choices, and those choices lead to consequences, some bad, some good, but nonetheless, you get to make your own choices. And you chose this morning to be here for Bible times, for worship. You chose to give some of your time to your brethren. You chose to give some of your time to God. And I'm grateful you chose to do that. And hopefully you are too. I know God is glad that you chose to do just that. Summer is coming. And with summer coming, especially this last month here, school is coming to an end. And as school is coming to an end, kids are going to be out for the summer. And as kids are out for the summer, a lot of times schedules change. And as those schedules change, a lot of times God is bumped out of those schedules. You know, the times were more during the school year, the times are more structured. You know exactly what you're going to do every single day, every single morning. That child's going to get up, go to school. That parent's going to get up, go to work, get their child ready for school, so on and so forth. Those things are very concrete. But when the summer comes, things are a little bit more lax. If you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, maybe you have the opportunity now to sleep in because your child doesn't have to be up early. If you go to work, maybe your schedule changes a little bit, you don't have to leave as early to get your kid to school and then get yourself to work. But all of these things are going to change as the summer comes. Maybe you've been out of school for a very long time. And being out of school for a very long time, you've not had this same structure. So your things don't really change when the summer rolls around, but they do. You will note that as the summer rolls around and kids are out of school, you have those high school kids who are getting those seasonal jobs. And as they're working this job for the summer, all your things are changing. Maybe the gym that you go to is more populated. Maybe that Starbucks that you usually stop at and talk to the same barista every single time they get the order just right and they can spell your name right. Now it's this teenage kid who can't get it right, not just once. Your life is going to change because school is out for summer. The point I want to make is that just because school is out for summer doesn't mean that we are out of church for the summer. Sometimes whenever our summer plans come in, our godly plans go out. Sometimes it's the fact that as we make changes to what we're going to do in our summer vacation, we decide that it's time to take a little vacation from God. And I want us to guard against that. Just because we're out of school does not mean that we need to be out of church. We need to be those who are always making our way back to church. That is the faith in the assembly. Let's take a look at some things that we can do to prevent that from happening and how to stay into the church. First and foremost, we need to consider those who left. Those who left the church are those who consider themselves to be out for summer. And this church is to be considered a school, and there are many who decided they no longer want to go to school. They have graduated from the faith, and they have really no more to further their education. They are out of school forever. They are out for the summer. Let's look at the greatest example of this in Jonah chapter 1. Jonah chapter 1. Verses 2 and 3. If you think about someone saying that they don't want to work for God, they're going to do all that they can to get away from God, Jonah is probably the one that you would go to. Jonah is someone who's going to be given explicit command from God, and then he's going to choose not to do what God is asking for him to do directly. Now, here's one thing for me as a preacher to say, hey, you know, in Matthew chapter 16, it says this, or Matthew 25, it says, it's one thing for me to tell you and for you to read for yourself that God has said to do something. It's another thing for God himself to take it upon himself, to call you by name and ask you to do a thing. It's interesting that I chose Jonah for this particular point, you know, being out in the summer. taking a summer vacation with God. Because it seems like that's exactly what Jonah's gonna do. He's gonna get on a big boat, go on a little bit of a cruise. Unfortunately, he's gonna be tossed into the water, get out of the water, he's gonna be spit out on an island. Now he's on this beach vacation. And then when he's on the beach, there's gonna be this great wind that's gonna push him one way. And there's gonna be this tree that sprouts up and gives him some shade. It seems like he's taking this vacation from God, but God is still pushing him in the right direction. Look at Jonah. In Jonah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. This is the example that we are not trying to follow in our lives. We're not trying to be those who are running from God, those who are seeking to do this will. In Jonah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with him to Tarshish in the presence of the Lord. It's funny that Jonah is going to try to leave the presence of the omnipresent God. The God who is everywhere and all places. He's going to try his best to get away from God. He says, if I can do one thing, I know that I can leave behind my hopes, my cares, and my problems. We do the very same thing. Whenever your vacation comes, maybe this is just, I mean, I speak for everybody. When vacation comes, I try to leave behind all the things that I have going on at home. Kind of. I don't want to think about any problems that are facing at home. I want to go off to this vacation and enjoy myself. I only think about the blissful things of life, be ignorant to what I'm going to return home to. She's always one of those people before we leave the house. She wants to clean the whole house and have it spotless. So whenever she returns, she only returns with whatever laundry we may bring back from this vacation and whatever little souvenirs we may have picked up along the way. To me, on the other hand, I don't care how we leave because while I'm away from it, I am away from it. This is Jonah. Jonah says, I know what God is asking me to do, but if I run far enough and fast enough, I don't have to take care of those responsibilities. Don't be like Jonah. Be someone who hears what God is asking you to do and be sure to take God on vacation with you. He deserves to be everywhere that you are, and he needs to be everywhere that you are. Maybe you're like me. When I was a kid, my family, I can't remember us ever going on a vacation in the summer. We were very homebody, we would do sports throughout the summer, things like that. Never vacation, but when you get to a certain age, it was a necessity that you got a summer job. Everybody's got to work. Let's go to Luke chapter 15. Sometimes whenever you're out for summer and those who have graduated from the faith and decide to leave the church, they no longer want to be a part of the school that is the church or a part of the school that is the faith. They no longer want to learn from God. They decide that they have taken some break. Sometimes they go on vacation, other times they get a summer job. You know, a summer job is gaining independence. When you get to that point in your life where you feel like you need your parents just a little bit less, yeah, maybe you need them for housing, but you have your own money. Want to go see a movie, you go and afford to do that. At one point in time, you probably could afford to get a tank of gas. Now you probably need a small loan to do that. But nonetheless, you felt a little bit more independent because you have this job. With this job, you start to feel yourself a little bit. And so you stray away from your parents and you go your own way. We see this in Luke chapter 15, verses 12 and 13, the prodigal son. He's going to ask for his inheritance. He's going to receive that inheritance. And once he has that, what else does he need? He decides to leave. When he leaves, he leaves his father in his father's house. It's very reminiscent of us in the church. Take a look at Luke 15. Luke 15, 12 and 13 says, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of the goods that fall to me. So he divided them his livelihood. And not many days after the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with horrible living. Two things I want you to know. Whenever people find themselves getting further away from the church, they see their lives increasingly getting worse. Farther Jonah got away from doing what God was asking him to do, the harder things got for him. Wasn't so bad before he got on the boat. When he got on the boat, he goes down to the boat, then a storm comes. Storm is kind of bad. And, well, I guess I'll jump off. He's thrown off, and now he's in the belly of a fish. That's bad. He's there for 3 days, and he's thrown up on this island. Look at the prodigal son. He gets all of his inheritance. He's richer than he's ever been. Man, this is the most money I've ever had. Because everything else belongs to my father, now belongs to me. And when he gets those riches, he then goes on his way. The further he gets away from home, the worse his living becomes. And the closer he gets to home, the richer he becomes. Yet again, comes to himself, he realizes that I can sit here and eat with the pig feet, or I can go and let my father service and at least have food and live in the house with God. The parallel here is to leave the Father, and to leave the Father's house is to leave God the Father, to leave the church that is the house of God, the pillar and ground of truth. Just because we're out for the summer, just because you feel like you have grown out of God, does not mean that you really can leave behind God and the faith that He's provided to us. Jonah and the prodigal son both needed summer school. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 5. Hebrews 5, 12 to 24. You know, a lot of things happen in life, a lot of ups and downs, and kids go through a lot throughout their school year. Sometimes they don't quite accomplish all that they needed to accomplish throughout that year. And so it comes summertime and they want to go and do what their friends are doing and be with their friends, but they need a little bit more instruction. So they find themselves back in that school throughout the summer, getting the credits that they need to move on to the next part of their life, their education. If you look at someone like Jonah, it took him a little bit of time, but a little bit of extra schooling by God, he was able to get to the point that he made it to Nineveh, and he was able to teach. If you look at the prodigal son, it took him a little bit more time, but he was able to get to the point with that extra teaching, and he came back into his father's house. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12 to 14, this is what summer school looks like. It should be that we know better, that we are able to teach others, but maybe we ourselves can go back and learn. Hebrews 5 says in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12 to 14, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the word of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a baby, but solid food belongs to those who are full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised as both good and evil. So many of our brethren are out in the summer. They decide that it's time for them to take a small vacation from God. They want to work their summer job. They rather do anything other than what God is requesting of them, but they are in need of a bit of summer school. They themselves ought to be teachers. They need to plug in, learn the first principles of the oracles of God. They are skilled with the word of righteousness. They can be taught again. You know, sometimes our brother receive that information. And in receiving that information, they decide that they want to return back to God. And returning back to God after this summer break that they've had, they realize they need some supplies. You know, just going back to school is not something you do. Imagine your kids showing up on the first day of school with none of the things that are required. They get to class, and that first day of class, they said, get out your pen. And he says, well, I don't have a pen. Well, did you bring a pencil? No, I didn't bring a pencil. We have a paper. Anything. He says, I don't have anything. The teacher says you're now unprepared. What could you possibly do here? Same thing he said about our brethren who are trying to make their way back to the church. As we have brethren making their way back to the church after they've been on this summer vacation, working those summer jobs, finally getting a little bit of summer school, as they are making their way back, we need to make sure that they have the supplies needed to get back to work. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15. We're going to look at verses 1 and 2. The one thing that you need, really the only supply that you need, is coming back to the Lord and back to the church to learn again within the school, to be taught within these classes, to learn the word of God. The one thing you need, the only book required, is the Bible. You don't need the Bible. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's going to discuss not just having the Bible, but having the Word. If you ever know that when Paul's preaching and all the other apostles are preaching and teaching, they're talking about Scripture, they're going to talk about the Word. They're not talking about a Bible, because, of course, the Bible and the Word are one and the same, but also the Bible hasn't been fully compiled. Just in a couple of chapters before, Paul's going to discuss the fact that they should be looking for that which is perfect, and how all those things that are previously using, the laying on of hands, the prophesying, the speaking in tongues, all those things are going to pass away because the Scriptures will replace that in fullness. But Paul says, regardless of if it's coming from prophecy or speaking in tongues, regardless if it's coming from an apostle or you have a completed word of God, let it be that you are listening to the word. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. If you're trying to get back into the Lord, if you're trying to make your way to the church, it must be that you have the supplies necessary. One thing that is necessary, the main thing that's necessary, is the word. 1 Corinthians 15, 1 and 2 says, moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, in which you stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast that word which I preached to you, unless you believe in vain. Paul says if you want to remain faithful, hold fast to the word. If you're making your way back to the church, hold fast to the word. You know what's interesting? Paul doesn't shift from this. He doesn't change in this one bit. If you go all the way to the end of this book, the very last verse of this book, he says that you are steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Your labor in the Lord is not going to be in vain. Paul says that you're looking to make your way back to God, and that to be a permanent place for you to be. Make sure you have the word. Stay in 1 Corinthians. Go back to chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And you plan on coming back to God in the same way as you plan on going back to school, whether you are going back to high school, middle school, or anything previous, or if you plan on right now in the stage of your life going back to college, if you're going back to school, you have to have the right supply. If you're going back to the church, you have to have the word. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 18 says, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is power. Anyone else, then they say, why do you carry so many books? Such a nerd, you're a geek. But if you want to look at someone who's knowledgeable, they are people who have gotten into the word, whatever it is they're studying. And if you look to be someone who is coming back to the Lord, you have to be someone who is getting into the word. Let's go to 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 13. The only supply that you truly need is going to be the Bible. And if you have the Bible, the next thing you need to have is assurance. You have to make sure that you actually are a member of the church, that you are enrolled. Could you imagine on the first day of school showing up? Let's just say for us older folks, if you're going to college, on your first day of college, you get there and you sit down in class and they go into the roll call, and as they go to the roll call, you don't hear your name. And so after class, you go up and you say, you know, Professor so-and-so, I didn't hear my name called, and go to the sheet again and say, well, you're not on here. Then you go to the office and you're talking to the secretary and they're going through and they said, yeah, you're not in the admissions anywhere. And you said, what do you mean? You gotta go in because you're not one of the students if you're not enrolled in this college. And then all the hopes that you have of getting this degree and gaining all this knowledge just went down the drain because you actually don't belong here. Because you didn't do the necessary requirement things to get you that school. The same thing said here at the Lord's church. You do imagine on the judgment day, getting there, and that level is being had with the honor, as we say, even if not mentioned. As you're going to Jesus, you say, can you check again and look in the Lamb's Book of Life and make sure I'm there? And he goes through, he says, I don't see a name, you're one that's blotted out spotted, but your name isn't present. Could you imagine how distraught you would be? In 2 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 5, Paul talked about this very thing, how that if you plan on coming to the Lord or coming back to the Lord, make sure that what you're saying to others and what is being said of yourself is actually true, that you are actually qualified to be amongst these people. In 2 Corinthians, 13 and verse 5, it says, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith, test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you? Unless indeed you are disqualified. Also, if you're someone who is truly qualified, you're going to be willing to make sure that what you're saying is so, not just about those whom you're preaching to, but about yourself as well. That you're going to preach yourself qualified, unless you know that Jesus Christ isn't actually in you, and you are indeed disqualified. You know, the last reason as to what you're going to need in order to come back to the church, you're going to need the right supplies, of course. You're going to need the book. You're going to need to be a member to be actually enrolled. But you're going to need to know why you're coming into the kingdom. What's your reason for coming in? Let's go to Titus 3. Titus chapter 3. Now, I talked about this in greater detail last week and about why we have people here from all ages. What's our mainstay, what brings us to here, and what keeps us here. And when I say here, I mean in the assembly, but also within the church, just as part of the faith. What keeps you a part of the faith, and what keeps you a part of this body of Christ in particular? The reason why we should be coming here is so that we can learn, and not just learn about who Jesus is and what God has done for us, but learning how to maintain good works as someone who knows who Jesus is and what God has done for us. Paul is going to tell Titus that this is exactly what he must be doing. In Titus chapter 3 and verse 14, it says, and let our people Also learn to maintain their work. To be urgent means that they may not be unfruitful. We consider those who left or were out for summer, and they told themselves that I don't need God. I'm going to go on a small vacation and step away from God for a while, and they do. Then others are going to say, well, I'm just too busy. I've been out here working this job, and I'm working this job so heavily that I don't have time for God. This summer's been long, it's extended. I've just been working so hard. And the others who say, I realize where I've fallen short, and I need a little bit more teaching. And go into summer school and learn about God. So they say, how can I get back to God? We tell them the supplies you need to get back to God is the book, and it's the Bible. And to make yourself one who's a part of the Lord's church, and to make sure that you're here to learn. How do we stay? How do we stay in church? Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and we'll get verse 10. You know, the only way that we can truly stay here, a part of the faith and a part of the Lord's church, is that we consider our peers. You know, maybe you didn't think about this when you were in school. Maybe you were just in an isolated place and you were only concerned about getting your work done. Make sure your assignments were turned in on time. Make sure that you would graduate, that you would get your diploma. Make sure that you got your degree. Maybe you could go concerned with you and your studies that you couldn't consider your next person besides your studies. I will say this: it is the fact that we can only work out our own salvation, but it is also a fact that we can help our brethren to work out their salvation. They still have to do it themselves, but we can be the encouragement, the exhortation that they need to make sure that they're doing the right so that they can stay in the faith. So if you want to stay in the church, make sure that while you're here, you're helping your peers to do the same. If you are currently in school right now and you can be someone who's going to help your friend in the study hall, help them study. In the same way you're going to help them in that study hall, do the same for them concerning the faith. Help them study about God. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, Paul says, now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same things, that there are no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. I think it's interesting the way that Paul says this. Of course, we understand the obvious, let there be no divisions. We all should be on the same page, not split for any reason. It doesn't matter what side we stand on, that side is going to be together. We're going to stand in the same place together. He goes on to say something else I think we understand, be perfectly joined together of the same mind. But what I think we misunderstand is the last part, and in the same judgment. Maybe in your mind you think to yourself, what other judgment is there? There's only one judgment. We know Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27, we're going to die, and then comes the judgment. There's only one judgment, and that is true. But which side of judgment are you going to be standing on? The side that's going to be condemned or the side that's going to be rewarded? Paul says, make sure that you're all standing on the side of being rewarded. Make sure you have the same minds and you can all enjoy the same judgment, all being judged righteous. If you plan on staying in church, you have to take care of your peers. Look at Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, 23 through 25. Hebrews 10, 23 through 25. You know, whenever you were in school, how often did you think about your classmates when they went home? Did you think about whether or not they had a meal that night? Whether they had running water, if they had electricity? Were you concerned about whether or not they had a change of clothes? Would they be able to come to school? Did they prepare shoes the next day? Did you think about whether or not their siblings could eat? Did you think whether or not that they had a two-parent household? Did you think about whether or not they were able to come to worship like you're able to worship? Did you consider the neighborhood they lived in, whether their crime rate was high or low? How often did you think about what your peers were going through whenever they left school? Probably not that much. How often do you think about your brethren whenever they leave these peers? Once this assembly is over and we all go our separate ways and we go home, do you think about the neighborhoods we live in? Do you think about the personal problems that we have in our lives? Do you think about how well the marriage is going or not going? Do you think about our individual faith and whether or not we've been praying enough or studying enough? Do you think about where the youth can step in and help us to do better in those ways? Because if you plan on staying in church, you have to plan on helping your peers to do the same. And in Hebrews chapter 10, and this is what the Hebrews writer is telling us. In Hebrews 10, verses 23 through 25, he says, your concern should not only be for yourself, but also for those in whom you call your family. Take a look at it. Hebrews 10, 23 to 25. It says, let us hold fast the confession of our faith, of our hope, without wavering. For he who promises faith, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Let's go back. And I know we talked about this, I've mentioned this a million times before, but this is not a verse about worship. Can it apply? Sure. This could be talking about us assembling on the first of the week, no doubt about it. We shouldn't forsake that. This is talking about any time that you're getting together to fulfill the purposes of 23 and 24. So take a look at those verses again, 23 and 25. First and foremost, this is an all-inclusive thing. This is not for this son, this is not for one or two, or preacher or elder thing. This is for everybody. This is why the Hebrew writer says, let us, all of us, let all of us hold to the same hope, the same confession of hope, and let us all do it without wavering. For he who has promised is faithful. He's promised this to all of us. He goes on to say, and then let us consider one another to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves. This is all in us. If you plan on staying in church, then you have to do it as the church as a whole. Not those who are divided, going against what Paul has said. Not like those who are not of the same mind, going against what Paul has said. Not being like those who stand in the same judgment, but on the unrighteous side of judgment. Rather being those who are all together because of the same hope. But being those who are all together without wavering, because we know that God has promised all of us the same thing, and He wants us all to consider one another to be stirred love and good works, because we all are wanting to assemble together and exhort each other as we see day approaching. If you want to stay in church, you have to encourage the teachers. You have to encourage the teachers. I don't know if you guys know any public school teachers, or teachers on any level, but the job is hard. There's high expectations with little to accommodate them and what they're trying to accomplish. They don't have a ton of control of the curriculums that come in, but they have to take those things and what they have to make it work for the kids that they're going to invest so much in. And here's the kicker. They're going to invest all of this into these kids and want to see them grow and do better, only to send them to somebody who may not do the same. So the 1 year that they get to have with these kids, they're going to invest their all to make sure that they have what they need and then some, and then send them away and hope that the next people will do the same. Imagine those who are in the church who are doing the same. I don't know if you guys have seen our Bible class teachers here this morning, but if you do see them, tell them thank you, because they're doing something that very few are willing to do. And as they do that job, they're going to do it forevermore. They're going to teach our youth forevermore. In 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 17, if you want to stay in the church, you have to encourage our teachers to continue to teach. And we also have to be allowed to be taught. In 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 17, Paul lets us know that teaching is something that's difficult. He tells us in a roundabout way. Take a look at what he says. 1 Corinthians 4 verse 17. He says, for this reason I have sent Timothy to you, who is my beloved and faithful son of the Lord, who will remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach everywhere in every church. Paul says, I'm sending Timothy to you because I think you might forget. I go everywhere teaching everything, and as I go all about teaching these things, I have to send someone back if I can't go myself to remind you to be faithful, because sometimes we forget. Aren't you grateful for the teachers who reminded you constantly the things that matter, who instilled in you the principles that you still carry to this day? Bible class teachers who are still here, currently raising up our youth and then encouraging our adults by teaching them. If you plan on staying in the church, you need to encourage those who are teaching and do yourself to be someone who is teaching and able to be taught. And then finally, if you want to stay in the church, you have to be considerate of yourself. 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy 4, verses 13 through 16. 1 Timothy 4, verses 13 through 16. Paul tells Timothy, till I come, give attention to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by prophecy, the laying on of hands and the eldership. Meditate on these things. Give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will have saved both yourself and those who hear you. This is the all-encompassing verse. If you want to stay in the church, you have to be someone who is helping your peers. If you want to stay in the church, you have to be encouraged to teach as well. You yourself are being a teacher and allowing for yourself to be taught. Paul tells Timothy that if you want to be someone who stays faithful to the Lord, it has to be that you are giving attention to reading. Anybody ever gone to school and never read? Makes sense. Also to do. When you go to school, you have to read the instructions, read the actual books, read the notes. You have to make sure you're reading so that you're giving attention to what's actually being taught. Give attention to the reading. Paul says, if you want to know what God desires you to do, read what he's telling you to do. Give attention to reading. Give attention to exhortation, that urgent warning, that letting you know that you may be in the wrong. Let me urge you to do better. So keep reading. Give attention to the doctrine. Don't neglect the gift that is in you. This is so important. I know we get caught up in this idea of spiritual gifts when we read through the New Testament and think about Timothy and how Paul probably laid hands on him. And now him having these spiritual gifts, he's going to go out and preach and teach. That may be very well true. But Paul is telling Timothy something much greater. Give attention to the gifts that you have. Maybe he has a gift of speaking to people. Maybe he's a great orator. Maybe he has a gift of being someone who's young but bold. So he's able to stand before crowds that others would stand before and teach them and proclaim the gospel. Paul says, nonetheless, whatever it is that you can do and do well, help me with it. Even given this for a reason. This is given to you by prophecy and laying on the hands of the elders. Meditate on these things. Give yourself a title to them, to progress and the evidence of all. Paul says to live in such a way that everyone can see the good that you're doing and how much you've grown. This very last verse here is the most important verse in this particular context. First, he says, take heed to yourself. Where heed means to stop and consider, stop and to give attention to. Paul says, I want you to stop and give attention to yourself. Make sure that you're okay before you go out and talk to anybody else. Before you proclaim the gospel, before you talk about what you've gone through, what you should be doing, or what others should be doing. Make sure that you're giving proper attention to yourself, and then give that same attention to the doctor. And he goes on and says, continue doing this, continue in them, for in doing this, you will save both yourself and those who hear you. Trying to get back in the church. You have to be sure that you're not someone who is out for something. And if you are out for someone, don't let it be that you're on vacation from God, but rather you are going on vacation with God. And wherever you go, you take God with you. Maybe you're not in a stage of life where you're literally out of school, but whenever school is out, sometimes we get into that vacation mindset. It's one of those weekend at Bernie things. You know, we're just dead and someone's kind of flopping us around here and there, but it should be the fact that we are alive in Christ. And if we are alive in Christ, we live in that way, not on vacation with God, not taking too much time with our summer job, but investing in the things that actually matter, not being those who are in need of summer school, but are learning constantly so that we can be those who are getting back to church. As we make our way back into church, we have to be those who have the right supply. That is the word of God. As you're learning from the word of God, you're going to be able to make sure that you are properly enrolled in the church. That is, making sure that your name is in the Lamb's Book of Life, and you know why you're here to learn about God. And if you do find yourself being here, stay here. We always tell kids it doesn't matter what age they are. My wife's not here. I'm going to say this. Don't tell her I said this. Whenever we see someone do something stupid, like they're just being a flat out idiot, we say to the kid, you see this kid stay in school. Whenever you see people in the world living ungodly and they're doing things that are just absolutely detrimental to their souls, look at your kids and look at yourself and say, kids, stay in church. Keep being faithful, keep following after God, keep doing the things that are pleasing to Him, keep doing the things that are going to glorify Him. If you're telling kids to stay in church, you are telling them to be mindful of their peers, be those who are able to be teachers, encouraging teachers, and able to be taught, but also those who are taking heed to themselves in the doctrine. Maybe even this morning, you're in need of a little bit more teaching. And you found yourself out for summer for a very long time. You've been on vacation for far too long. Maybe you've gotten so caught up in that summer work that you haven't been giving much attention to your faith. But now it's time for you to get back to school. You have the right supplies, I'm sure, sitting in your hand. Maybe it's on your phone, but you have the word of God. And if you have the word of God, then you know you have the peers here to encourage you to do right, and the teachers who can teach you all you need to know about God, that you have to take heed to yourself. Here this morning, you have a need, make it known as a stand. And I just